Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we are with another theory or educational video, this time answering the very important question of, hi Curse Deck Builder, how do I evaluate cards for Commander? And if you've been enjoying this more theory-based or educational content, please comment and let me know. I've really enjoyed making it, and I'm hoping that if the reaction is good, I can keep making some. And if you have questions or ideas for more of these videos, please comment below, or you can join my Patreon and have access to the Discord where you can just send me those questions directly and see videos like this earlier. So, how do I evaluate cards for Commander? This is a very difficult question. I feel like card evaluation is a skill that you grow, especially after playing the game for many years, but I wanted to provide the two methods I generally use whenever I see a new card, so I can have a better idea of its strength. And those two methods are Quadrant Theory, Commander style. Quadrant Theory may be something you've heard me say in a few of the deck assist videos, but I'm going to go more in depth here. And then I have my own little thing, Curse Deck Builder's Checklist of Card Importance. We're going to kind of explain that a little more. I'm going to hide that for a little bit, but basically it is how I use a system of, positives and negatives and try to narrow how important a card is and therefore its general power level or my general interest in including it in a deck. But let's start with Quadrant Theory. What is Quadrant Theory? So I want to be clear that this was not my idea. In fact, when I look back, I can find an article, I believe this is from, I think it's from the Mothership, but I could be wrong. It's out there by Marshall Sutcliffe, which talking about Quadrant Theory as an idea of how we evaluate cards specifically for Limited. For those who don't know, Limited is draft, sealed, anything like that when you don't come in with a set deck. So they need a very quick system to evaluate cards both before and during the draft because you are technically on a time limit. Now, their version of Quadrant Theory had 4 criteria to evaluate a card with. How good it was in the opening of the game, how good it is in parity when you and your opponent are of equal standing, how good is it when you're winning, and how good is it when you are losing. And though this is really good, Commander is a little different. So for mine, I go in for 3 of them the same, but how good is a card during neutral, as in you and your opponents are generally in the same phase of the game? How good is the card when you are ahead, therefore winning or generally ahead of most of your opponents? How good is it when you are behind? We can consider this losing, but I'm just going to say you're behind value, behind resources than your opponents. And finally, how good is this card with your commander on the field? Now, that last one is added because commanders do not exist in Limited, but I've also replaced what they had before as opening because, well, the opening phase in a game of Commander is a little different. In one-on-one Magic, your opening phase, let's say, the first few turns of the game, which isn't always true depending on the draft environment, your opening could be the first turn to the first few turns. But here, the way Commander opens is generally the same in most lower power levels to mid power level pods, where the first few turns are kind of a wash. Most players prefer to use their first 2 turns to play a tap land or play into ramp. Though I know this is changing, and if you've watched my video on ramp and mana rocks, you will note that I really do value playing a creature early, but still with that ahead, openings don't exist in the same way in Commander, so I rather lump that into neutral. When the game starts and you and your opponents don't have any resources, you are technically in neutral. So the way I want to do it is when we look at a card, I want to measure when it is good. Is it good in neutral? Is it good ahead? Is it good behind? And is it good with your commander? And certain cards and certain archetypes will have different answers. So taking an example here, we can look at a card like Divination. Now, I'm using Divination here, but we can generally slot in any non-conditional card draw here, right? So I'm thinking also like Read the Bones, Sign in Blood, cards like that. And For a card like Divination, we can see that this card is good in neutral when you and your opponents are at parity. It's always good to draw extra cards because you have the breathing room as no one is coming to attack you, and you can start continuing to set up resources for the future. It's good when you're ahead because, well, when you're ahead, it's assumed you are ahead in resources and therefore can make the most of those cards, or you can use a Divination to basically build your storage capacity of answers in your hand, like getting more removal, more counter magic, things like that. And finally, it's good when you are behind because you need to be drawing into answers. Either they be like board clears or removal, or you might need to draw into your resource engines that will rocket you back into the game. For example, if you've been stuck on 3 mana and your opponents are on 5 and 6, Divination has a pretty high chance of drawing you into a land, which will enable you to get back in the game. Look at my video on how many lands you should play to see the sheer power of an extra few draws to get you the lands that you need. Now, this one isn't particularly good with your commander, but that's more to do because we don't know what the commander is in this scenario, because if we do, all of a sudden, yeah, this card does become particularly good with your commander if you can get that synergy going. Now, this is not to say that a card requires many check marks to be considered good. Wrath effects such as Day of Judgment are particularly good. These are good cards, but are good in very specific scenarios, right? Traditionally, we only want to use them when we are behind. And you might say, well, Cursed, what if you're at neutral but someone is threatening to take you out of the game? I would consider that behind. I know there's some maybe a disagreement on nomenclature, but if you are feeling threatened in a reasonable way, you are not at neutral. If you're looking at the board and you have 1 million creatures, but your opponent has 2 million creatures, I think it's safe to say that you are behind. And so these kind of wrath effects, specifically, they're good in this zone, and they're still good cards even though you don't want to cast them when you're ahead. Once again, this kind of card isn't good with your commander due to the nature of it, but that's not universally true. Once again, we can get that last little check mark really, really easily by building around the right commander at the right time. This is also important to consider that certain cards, like we were looking at card draw, unconditional card draw, we can look at conditional card draw here, and all of a sudden we lose a check mark, right? Divination was good in the first 3, Shamanic Revelation gets a little worse when you're behind. I would say considerably worse. Shamanic Revelation is phenomenal when you're ahead. In fact, it's almost win more when you're ahead, and we'll get back to win more in a second. But at neutral, Shamanic Revelation is a very, very good card. If everyone's in general parity, people are trying to figure out who's the threat, people are trying to set up combos or engines, Shamanic Revelation is just really, really good to draw you 4 to 5 cards to set up your next few turns, and maybe even more if you have more mana than that. But when you're behind and you are not controlling creatures, and therefore this does not draw you cards, or let's even be reasonable, you have a single creature, well, you're not really going to cast this card. And this is ignoring the ferocious side of it. Obviously, that's extra text, but for the sake of this argument, I wanted to just look at that first part. Still a very, very strong card, but as you can imagine, looking at this card and comparing them to Divination, you might get the idea of why I really like the inclusion of non-conditional draw in a commander deck. When this is good, it's great. But when it's bad, it can't beat out Divination. So I want both in my deck. Now let's go back to that idea of win more. Win more is it's sometimes hard to describe to players who don't know the context of it. Win more is a card that you play and you've already been winning, and it's just going to make you win more. It's just going to amplify your victory. For a lot of players, it's the difference between wanting to cast an overrun effect, giving all your creatures +X and trample. It's the difference from them wanting to have +10 and trample and +100 and +100, right? Like, the +10 usually will end games. It's really not needed to go above that, not universally, but you catch my drift. But +100, wow, that feels so good and it's so exciting, and our opponents are going to be even more defeated, right? They were already going to lose beforehand, but now it just feels better. These cards are, they're kind of traps. They're really fun to play with. They're very fun to imagine with, but I said play, they're very fun to dream with. They're actually not very fun to play with. They're actually awful to play with because they do not help you in the crucial points of the game where you need your cards to be good. This card, Crucible of Fire, is one of those classic examples because it is giving a massive power boost of +3/+3 to a group, a kindred of creatures, let's say, dragons, who traditionally do not need +3/+3, but they tend to be 5/5, 6/6s, and the like. Now, I do know this is a little different than it used to be, as we do have more dragons at the lower scale, mainly due to the Dungeons and Dragons set and a few others. But even that, like, this is a 4-mana card that only helps when you have 4 or 5 dragons, and if you have 4 or 5 dragons, you're winning the game. So, when we see a card that is only good when you're ahead, it's pretty safe to be win more. But, as it's noted on the screen right now, if it is only good when you're ahead, it's good when you're ahead, and it's also good with your commander, that to me is the clincher. It is a win more card, right? When I would suggest that when your commander is out and you are not behind and you're neutral, you're probably a little ahead, right? Your deck is doing the thing it wants to by having, the creature card you've built your deck around on the battlefield. So if the status is you're ahead and your commander's out, you are winning, and for this card to be good, well, that's very much so win more. So this is one of my favorite aspects of Quadrant Theory, is it allows us to signify or find these cards really, really easily. And it's a quick explanation that everyone can grok and feel like they understand the win more situation. Now, this doesn't just work with individual cards, this also works with types of cards. For example, we can look at equipment, and equipment is good in neutral, it's good when you're ahead, and it tends to be good with your commander. Well, neutral and ahead are easy to tell because you'll have creatures to attach with, but with your commander, you might notice I didn't put a commander there. That's because universally, not always, but almost universally, your commander is a creature, right? And so an equipment card with your commander out should work 90% of the time. Therefore, a card like this is just good with your commander. However, equipment tend to be bad when you are behind because you may not have any creatures, or you may be walled out of attacking or otherwise locked out of spending your mana, something like that, right? If you are unable to hit neutral, then equipment gets worse. They're really bad top decks. They don't bring you back into the game. In fact, they kind of further cement your position because now you have a card in your hand that requires even more of an investment in the future to do anything. That kind of sucks. Likewise, though we mentioned this before, Wrath of God and these board clear effects are almost universally in that behind category, because if you have 30 creatures and no indestructibility and your opponents have 10 creatures each, well, you don't want to cast that Wrath. You're ahead. You don't want to give up that parity. Yes, I know exceptions exist. You and I, viewer, we know exceptions exist, but once again, this is a general idea. Speaking of those exceptions though, this works with types of cards too, does have a but. And this but is that there are specific cards that solve these problems, and that makes those cards incredibly valuable. Looking at equipment, we can take Sword of the Animus and look at Bitterthorn. Well, isn't it crazy that Bitterthorn comes with a living weapon, a germ creature attached to it, solving the problem that it had before. You don't have any creatures and you draw Bitterthorn? Not a problem. You now have a creature on the battlefield and the equipment is attached. I love that. I think that solves the problem, and to me, makes Bitterthorn a much stronger card. Likewise, when it comes to board clears, we have the new Spectacular Pileup. This is a card that destroys creatures and vehicles through indestructibility, but also has the text cycling, right? All of a sudden, this card has solved the problem it had before, that when you are at neutral and you draw a Spectacular Pileup and you really don't want to board clear, you can cycle it away. If you are ahead and you are looking for that last piece of removal to win the game and you draw this, once again, you can cycle it away. that doesn't mean you're always going to. Like, don't get me wrong, sometimes you're just going to sandbag spectacular pile up, even if you are ahead, because, you know, you never know what's going to happen. And you want this as a guarantee that should everything go south, you're able to bring this back. But you could cycle it, and all of a sudden this card gets way, way better. Now, I do want to address there are limitations to Quadrant theory. The first one is this doesn't specify how strong a card is, just when it is good. Necropotence and Divination, you know, are very similar cards in essence, especially on that first turn, where with Divination you can draw 2 and Necropotence you can slam it, pay 2 life, and end of turn you end with 2 other cards in your hand. I know it's not a perfect comparison, but follow me on this. Necropotence is way stronger than Divination. We know that, right? I don't have to explain that, because Necropotence can easily draw you 20 cards that turn as well. So, though they are generally in the same slot, though I would argue Necropotence is probably not good when you're behind as much, there's still something to consider that this just does not explain power level. Second thing is Quadrant theory does not identify how many of each type of card you should play. This is kind of like, this is important because we can't use this to build a deck. We can use it to identify the cards in the deck and how they play within the deck, but I can't sit down and tell you, hey, I want 6 cards that are good in all states, I want 4 cards that are good behind blah, 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 right? This is that commander by numbers thing I really, really dislike. I'm sure if you've watched my videos and watched my deck assist videos, you understand fundamentally this challenge is about the joy of deck building. And if you gave me an equation or a ratio to build a commander deck, I would be profoundly upset. It's just not what I want to do and not fun to me. So in a way, I'm glad that Quadrant theory can't solve that problem, but it's good to acknowledge that nonetheless. Finally, it doesn't help the power level conversation. This is kind of the first point as well, but I do want to note that, like, if you and your friend are having an argument about how strong a card is, you can't Quadrant theory that argument out, because, well, it's just not going to change anything. If someone thinks Swords to Plowshares is better than Path because Path ramps, and someone thinks that Path is better because it doesn't gain that life, Quadrant theory is not going to solve that problem, not even by a little bit. So it is specifically a tool used for placing cards in decks and identifying what they do for the deck. So then, of course, the question comes, how do we evaluate power? And of course, this is the simplest thing we've ever done. If we're taking a look at these cards, and I'm sorry, my face is going to cover it a little bit, we can see that Glory Seeker is a 2/2 for 1 and a white, and Alabaster Host Sanctifier is a 2/2 lifelink for 1 and a white. So of course, Alabaster Host Sanctifier is better than Glory Seeker. Then we can further go ahead, and once again, I'm covering it up a little bit, is that Brightblade Stoat is at the same mana cost and the same power and toughness, a first strike lifelinker, which makes it, of course, better than Alabaster Host Sanctifier. Now, obviously, I'm being a little facetious here, because the second we start thinking about creature types, and the second we go beyond this very, very reductive analysis of these cards, we start hitting problems. Well, Alabaster Host Sanctifier will be better in your Phyrexian deck, whereas Brightblade Stoat will be better in your Weasel deck. Like, right? These are things that do matter. Not even including the fact that neither of these cards should belong in any commander deck, because they're both really, really bad. In fact, putting the cards together to make this joke is really, really hard, because there are not that many direct upgrades to cards that someone can't lean and go, well, actually, they're not necessarily better. Like, that's just the nature of Magic, and it's fine. It's not a problem. But once again, it makes evaluating power very, very difficult. So, with that in mind, instead of how strong is a card, we should ask, how important is this card? Now, this is a bit of a game on naming, like nomenclature game that I like to run. If you've watched my videos, you may have heard I use a similar one when I talk about successfulness about decks. I just want to divorce the idea of power level of cards to how we evaluate them, because a power level isn't everything. And a lot of my viewers know this. A lot of my viewers enjoy lower power pods. I like higher power pods, but I also enjoy budget pods or other groups of commander decks that are meant to play on equal footing, even if that footing is weaker, like Pauper and the like, right? This is a very valid and important way to play Magic, but it doesn't solve the problem, because the question still becomes, well, how powerful are these cards? So here is my system to determine card importance. This is what makes me think that I want to include a card in a deck. Now I'm going to go over them, and then we're going to go over each one individually, but here is my checklist. The first thing I'm looking for is card uniqueness, then color uniqueness, mana value uniqueness, range, effort, and commander scaling. What do those mean? Let's get right into it. All right, card uniqueness. We know this card, Unsummon. We love this card. Return target creature to its owner's hand. There's no card like this. Except for Fading Hope kind of does the same thing. It has a different kind of, bonus if the creature's small, but it's a unique effect. But Mana War does the same effect, except for it's stapled to a creature, so we get the same effect for more mana with a creature. But also, Aether Channeler is the same mana cost as Mana War, but has more abilities, so it does have Unsummon on it, but it's a little different. That's not even including, I stapled two of them together, but Brazen Borrower is a card that has it as an adventure. Jace the Mind Sculptor has it on a Planeswalker. They're all the same card. This is what I mean by card uniqueness. We can take these cards and say there are a lot of variants on the unsummon ability. Now, none of these cards are all unique, but the ability to unsummon is a common thing that we can find. So a card that all it does is unsummon isn't particularly unique. The comparison here is Thassa's Oracle, or at a lower power level, we might say Harbinger of the Seas. Thassa's Oracle is a card that is almost completely unique. There's not a card that does this effect in the way that it does, even a little bit, which makes it an incredibly powerful and important card. Likewise, Harbinger of the Seas, though we have cards that turn non-basic lands into islands, or lands into islands with flood counters and the like, we don't have a creature that universally just does this effect by existing. Now, for people who know, this is a card that is a take on Magus of the Moon, which is a take on Blood Moon, so the ability itself is not wholly unique, but the ability to make non-basic lands into islands on a creature that just has it as a static ability is unique, and therefore both of these cards get that little check mark. They are on my radar, they are on my mind when I'm building decks, because they are cards that do something that no one else can. This is also interesting because this doesn't have to be uniqueness in the sense that the text on the card. I'm going to give an example here. In oh boy, this is going to be a hard one. Hashatan, Scarab's Fist, in that commander deck, we got this new card called Reptome Mystic. Reptome Mystic is a 1 and a blue, 2/1 flying zombie bird wizard. The card I think is really, really cool because of this ability that says each creature card in your hand has cycling, and cycling 1 and a blue. This, you might look at it and go, whoa, cursed. This is a highly unique card. It's so rare to see this kind of ability, especially in a package like this. This must be really, really high on the card uniqueness scale. Here's the thing. You know what card is really, really similar to this card? Merfolk Looter. And I know that feels derivative, but hear me out. A card like Reptome Mystic is a card that allows you to cycle, discard a card, and draw a card for 1 and a blue. Due to the mana cost associated with doing this, and in this deck with your commander where you're going to want to pay 2 and a blue extra to do this, it's going to be something you can do once a turn cycle. Once again, do you know what discards a card and draws a card once per turn cycle? It's Merfolk Looter. In fact, Merfolk Looter is better because it draws a card then discards a card. It just can't attack as well and doesn't have relevant creature types. I know they're not the same card, and I know it's derivative to kind of just like make these cards into small things like this, but this is something I want you guys to be thinking about. This is something I want everyone to think about when they deck build, because they don't look like the same card, but they act like the same card. And that means Ret Tome Mystic takes a hit in card uniqueness. So let's talk about color uniqueness. If I showed you a card, and I'm bearing the lead, obviously. If you read the text, you know what's going on, but a 2 and green instant card that says destroy target enchantment, you lose 2 life, you wouldn't be very interested in that card. But when I showed you Withering Torment, that, like I said, I buried the lead a little with the target creature, but Withering Torment is 2 and a black, destroy target creature or enchantment, you lose 2 life, you're gonna be like, whoa, okay, that's a good card. Color uniqueness is about cards having an effect that is rare for that color to have. Sometimes we talk about things like color shifting. This is specifically when a card is changed from one color to another, but this generally does mean an effect that is rare or hard to find. Like I said, black being able to destroy artifacts or enchantments does happen, but it is rare. Green being able to destroy creatures or do direct damage is rare, but it does exist. These cards immediately go up in value because of how rare that ability is. Now, there's a bit of a trick here, because this is something, what colors are allowed to do changes in each era of Magic. We can look at Dark Ritual, for example, where black was able to create temporary mana, an ability that was then mainly gifted back to red, where it's now a red ability, but we still see it occasionally in black. Now, for people who play Standard, Modern, or Draft, or Limited, anything like that, this is something to think about, because it's unlikely that black will gain that ability again. However, as Commander is a format that reaches really far back, we do have access to Dark Ritual. So Dark Ritual is something that black can do, albeit rarely. So color uniqueness allows us to value cards on how hard it is for that color to do that thing. This is, of course, also pretty important when you are playing monocolor decks, because this is how you gain access to things that are harder for your deck to gain access to. Let's talk about mana value uniqueness with another black card comparison. This is Village Rites and Altar Reap. Altar's Reap and Village Rites have the same text and they do the same thing, but the only difference is Village Rites is 1 mana and Altar's Reap is 2. It's really not more complicated than that. There's a lot of cards that we value even though they do simple things, they just do those things at a lower mana cost, right? An effect that we would say, you know, let's think of Nature's Claim. Nature's Claim is 1 green mana to destroy target enchantment or artifact, and the controller gains 4 life. That is half the mana of another card like Naturalize, which does it for 2 mana without the life gain. This is valuable. This is important. We usually get that feeling of how much something should cost, and when that cost is halved or lowered, we value those cards. So straightforwardly, if it costs abnormally to what the rest of the cards like it do, cards like it cost, it is unique in mana value. My goodness. All right, let's talk about range. Range is super, super simple. There's a mana value difference in these cards, but ignore that for a second. Bring to Trial is a card that exiles target creature with power 4 or greater, and Exercise is a card that exiles target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. Really, really simple there. Range is just how far a card can work, right? This is not necessarily what it affects. We're going to get into that in a second. This is more of how much it can affect, right? This is why we value cards like A Stroke of Midnight or Beast Within or even Vindicate, right? Because they have such a large pool of targets that they can work on. This is just better to work with in any deck. So this includes cards such as, you think of Aristocrats that trigger when artifacts are destroyed, or cards that draw you cards when artifacts or enchantments are played. Anything that gives you that like and clause, that gives you just a little more juice is good in range, right? That's something we should consider in the importance of cards. Going back to that idea of what it can target, I call this effort. How much work do you have to put in to get what you want? Now, this might also be viewed as how to trigger cards. For example, the difference between a creature that... let's get back to that in a second. Let's finish this idea. Infernal Grasp and Doomblade are both creature cards that destroy creatures, but Infernal Grasp asks for 2 of your life, and Doomblade wants a non-black creature to be destroyed. Now don't get me wrong, I love Doomblade, it's one of my favorite cards, but one can say Infernal Grasp requires less effort and therefore has the check mark. Going back to the previous thing, looking at 2 cards such as Cloudkin Seer and Library Larcenist are very, very similar cards when one of them, when it enters the battlefield, draws a card, and the other one draws a card when it attacks. Which one's better? That's a hard thing to quantify because different decks will give you different answers. However, it is still bringing up the question of what is easier to trigger, an ETB or an attack. And through that question, you'll be able to figure out how much effort you need to put in to get the effect. After that, we have, and coming to the end, Commander Scaling. So Commander Scaling is really simple, is that in Commander you have 3 opponents, whereas in regular Magic you have 1. So Corrupt Court Official, that this target opponent discards a card, and Burglar Rat, which says when this creature enters, each opponent discards a card, are very similar in 1v1, but very, very different in 3 versus 1, right? Burglar Rat is so good at what it does, it is like the name of an archetypal type of card. The Burglar Rat cards are all cards without text that each opponent discards a card. And the easiest 3-for-1 in your life. So you can see that if a card is good with multiple opponents, it gets that little check mark and it's much, much stronger in Commander. So with these in mind, let's look at a few examples. Looking at a card like Smothering Tithe, we can see why it's so good. Card uniqueness, it is very, very unique. Though there's a lot of different ways recently White gets to create treasure, this is very specifically punishing your opponents for drawing cards. Something that they do often, including their initial draw of the turn. That's a lot of punishment and very hard to find, so this is a very unique card. As I mentioned before, it doesn't pass the color uniqueness because lately, over the last, I don't want to say how many years, it's going to make me feel old, but even as far back as Strixhaven and before that, White has been getting punishment cards that give them a resource advantage, whether it be token creatures, token treasures, planes onto the battlefield, for when your opponents do things that that will accelerate them in the game. I'm thinking of like casting extra spells, playing extra lands, attacking you a lot, things like that. So as a concept, this is a White effect, and therefore Smothering Tithe is not White unique. It's not color unique, right? Mana value uniqueness is not also there because Smothering Tithe is 4 mana, and at the time and still now, this kind of effect is 4 mana. 4 mana is a very, very good deal for this. I can't imagine it getting cheaper, but generally, for something this strong, you're paying the right amount for Smothering Tithe. So, though it's very strong, once again, it's not unique in mana value. Range, this is a card that has a pretty good amount of range because it hits, it just hits all your opponents, and it hits their cards and their drawing cards, and it doesn't differentiate between the kinds of cards they're drawing, right? It doesn't say like draw cards on their turn. It doesn't say draw cards that's not the first card. Like the range of it hits all draw cards. It has really good range. We don't even need to think about it. It's a check mark. Effort, likewise, you do not need to attack with this creature. You do not need to, pay mana when they do this. It requires almost no effort from you. You play this card and it is going, it is online, and you don't need to worry about it. So it gets a check mark there. Commander Scaling, we all know Smothering Tithe is so good with 3 opponents because it's just 3 times the amount of draw triggers that you usually get, and therefore very, very strong. Looking at another card, one I really like, but we don't see as much as Smothering Tithe, we've got Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt is still really, really strong, but it's not card unique because red, direct damage spells are pretty common. It's not color unique because red gets a lot of direct damage spells. However, it is that mana value uniqueness that makes it really, really good. It's just so rare to get this ability so effectively on 1 mana. In fact, outside of Gut Shot, we can't get lower than this, right? And therefore, its mana value uniqueness is very strong. Likewise, range is really, really high. It hits any target. It's planeswalkers, creatures, players, and that's already very, I guess battles too. That's really, really strong. And finally, effort, there's no clause to it. You don't need to sacrifice a land. You don't need to for it to have attack this turn or anything like that, right? It's just online, it's just working, and it's good. Another card, just looking at more examples, we've got Toski. This is a very unique card. Nothing really works like Toski, though there are elements of how Toski works. All of this text beforehand, the spell can't be countered, indestructible, and attacking each turn. These aren't things we find on other cards that have a similar effect, so that's unique. And I like that. Color uniqueness, it's not that unique in color because green has this, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card pretty often. And blue has this kind of ability as well on enchantments at 4 mana, so it's also not mana value unique. However, once again, range, effort, and commander scaling are all checked off because it hits all of your opponents, it hits for each creature and not each creature per opponent. You don't need to pay mana or make any extra effort to get it, they just need to hit, and hitting your opponents with creatures, especially in a green deck, is really easy. And finally, it scales really well because you have 3 opponents. One more example at least. I forgot how many examples I added. Reality Chip, it is a unique card because there's nothing quite like it, though we do have other versions of this kind of effect. We don't have it usually on equipment that can also be a creature. This is pretty unique and I like it. It's not color unique because this kind of future sight effect is pretty common in blue. However, it is mana value unique because of how low this is. This is 2 and then 3 later, as opposed to most of these cards that are 4 mana and up. Its range is pretty high because it allows you to cast both lands and spells. It doesn't say just creatures, it doesn't just say instants or sorceries, which we see sometimes, so the range is high. And the effort, I think it's low effort. Some might argue otherwise, but as long as you're playing on a creature deck, to reconfigure this on a creature is very, very low effort. Another important thing to consider when we're valuing these cards is how sick the art is. This is the hidden final one, but I think it's still important to note. And that cards that just don't have that many check marks does not mean they're bad. Once again, Fel is a very strong card. However, it's not unique in its card, because there's a lot of destroy target cards, creature spells. It's not unique in its color because black is all about this. Its mana value is what you'd regularly pay, and it doesn't scale in Commander. However, range and effort are what it's all about. It hits any creature, and you don't need to do anything to make it happen. That sick art is just the cherry on top. Now, I've left these last ones for you guys to fill out, like a little bit of homework here. These are 5 cards that I saw from, these were the Duskmourn Commander cards. So recently, but not that recent, that I think it may or may not still be in your head. How would you rate these for yourself? Where would you check these off, and how card important are they? Like, how important are these cards in what they do? Soaring Lightbringer is a really good example of a card I really like. How does it fit in there? I'll leave that to you. Likewise, They Came From the Pipes is a card that can also have checkmark. I'm trying not to spoil the answers because I have very direct opinions on them. They Came From the Pipes is another one to check. Into the Pit is another one that you can use this system to figure out how good is this and how important it is for decks. The last 2 are Gleeful Arsonist, one whose art I really, really do like. And I do note I left the sick art checkbox there just in case you wanted to put it. But the green one and the last one is Disorienting Choice. How important are these 5 cards and how would you measure them? And so the conclusion I have for this video is that using both the quadrant theory and card importance, you can evaluate any card to a certain degree of correctness. You know, cards do change evaluation when they go into different commander decks, in different commander pods, or even just erratas, because certain effects and, you know, companions and the like, they change what the card does, and new cards that come in with Synergize will change them. So, you know, a card is not an island. Hold on, though that's a good joke, let me rephrase that. A card is not a time capsule. It will never just exist without context, so we have to use these techniques to find the context of how good they are. But as I say it here, cards can be evaluated by importance to see if they are worth playing, and then by quadrant theory to see if they belong in your deck. A card can be really, really good and still a bad fit for your deck because of how it would be used in your deck. Now, as always, we end in with, but cursed, what about this super hard to evaluate card? You know what? If you have a card that you're having a hard time evaluating, put it in the comment section and I will take a crack at it, or other people will as well. I think it's important that some cards are really, really difficult to evaluate, especially in this perpetual spoiler season that we're in. That's the fun part about this video, is that this video is always relevant because we're always in spoiler season these days. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. Thank you, good luck, and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.